on a daily basis. So, anyways, all right. Lesson 2, growing in faith. You already know we're discussing faith tonight. You read that in your book, you discussed that in your group time. Spiritual vitamins. Okay, last week we talked about the palm tree, and we all wanted to be nice, beautiful, majestic palm trees when we left. We studied growth in Psalms 92, talked about God's promise that the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. In order to do that, we need to give God thanks, remember the short-lived sprout of the wicked. We need to remember the palm after the storm. We need to stay planted in the house of the Lord, and then the righteous will still bear fruit even though they are old, even though they're aged. So this list of qualities right here that we read in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 through 5, 6, and 7. It's not just highly recommended, strongly encouraged. It's not a buffet where you can pick and choose. Okay, well, I like this quality, so I'm going to, I want to have this quality. I'm going to add this quality into my life. No, it's essential to our Christian life, and they build on each other. Okay, so, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge. I can't just skip over faith and go to knowledge. I have to start with faith. And we all know that our Christian life begins with faith, correct? Faith at salvation. Yes, we have to exercise faith when we get saved. We get saved by grace through faith. Faith comes first. It's the foundation. We need faith in order to be saved, and we need a whole lot of faith in order to live the Christian life. Sometimes you hear of unsaved people and the hardships, the difficulties, the tragedies they go through, and it just boggles my mind. How are they surviving? How are they making it through this time without faith in Jesus? Now, we know we go through hard times, and that is very hard. But, goodness, it is such a comfort to know that we have Jesus right along with us in the midst of that trial. Life happens, whether it's a big storm, a little storm, or just daily life, like your printer not wanting to print the rest of your outline, okay? Life wears on us, and we can grow weak, and we can lose sight of Jesus. We have to remind ourselves we live in a sin-cursed earth. We can go to places that seem perfect. We can go to beautiful places. We can have the best day ever, but we're still living in a sin-cursed earth. We have to remember we're made from dust. Our bodies, yes, we are made in the image of God, but these physical bodies, now that sin has cursed the earth, these bodies are not going to last forever. We certainly think they will sometimes. We want them to, but then, you sleep wrong on your back or something, and you wake up the next morning, it's like, oh, hang on, give me a minute, and a whole pot of coffee, and then I'll be ready, right? And we have to remind ourselves, Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. How often, sometimes you hear this a lot in marriage and probably even in parenting too. It's true. Your spouse, your children is not the enemy. They might seem like it at times, but they're not. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness. Our ultimate battle is the devil, and he uses those people and uses those circumstances to try to wreck lives. Faith is a very broad topic. Okay, how in the world are we supposed to learn everything there is to learn about faith in 30 minutes, maybe 32 minutes or 35, right? Where do you even start with faith? There's so much in the Bible. There's so many illustrations. There's so many definitions. We could probably all go around and give our own definition of faith. There's a lot. So we're not going to try to learn all we can about faith tonight. And most of this, probably all of it, is just a review. It's all things we've learned before. It's all things we've heard before. But, sometimes just like the Bible, I've read it and read it and read it, and then all of a sudden, bam, one day this verse, it's like, I didn't know that verse was in the Bible. What in the world? Wow, that was just what I needed. And God's word is alive. That's why we say God's word is alive, because it ministers comfort and it strengthens us and it gives us grace just at the very time we need it. You're all familiar with the phrase, the just shall live by his faith. Okay, it's mentioned 4 times in the Bible. And you just, no pun intended, okay, but you just can't get around it. We have to live our Christian lives by faith. We just have to. I was at a ladies' conference, and she was talking kind of about, it was a healthy breakout session, and, she had said, let me see if I can remember it. Okay, losing weight is hard, and then it was something to the effect of something else is hard, choose your hard, okay? Or I can't remember what it was, but it was like, oh, okay, let's take that to the Christian life, okay? Daily life is hard, okay? Or I can live by faith, which is hard, okay? Choose your heart. What are you going to live your life by faith with God, or are you going to live your life without God? Choose your heart there. So think of how many times we exercise faith just in our normal daily lives. Flip on a light switch. You catch a flight, go on an airplane. I was with Caitlin at her field trip last week, and we went to FlightWorks over in Mobile, where they're making these airplanes, and they have all these different, these 4 big stations, and it's an airplane assembly line, and they talk about, this station this happens, and this station this happens, and here's what they do, and they have all these inspectors and everything. When I get on a plane next week, I'm putting a whole lot of faith in all of those men that I've never seen before, okay, that they had the training, they had the knowledge, they got their certifications. I'm putting my faith that they did everything correctly. I'm putting my faith in the inspectors, that they inspected everything correctly. I'm putting my faith in the pilot, that he got his pilot's license and he passed with flying colors, not like, oh, he barely passed. Just we put a whole lot of faith in things and in people that we've never seen before. So what makes it so hard about living our Christian life by faith? We do it on a daily basis, right? So what makes faith so difficult? Well, a lot of times, I've got 3 simple thoughts here. This is still the introduction, sorry. We can't see what God is doing, and our human brains want to know. Okay, what is God doing? Why is he doing it? How is all of this going to work together? Because I don't understand it. And since I don't understand it, I can't have faith. Well, do you know what? I sure don't understand a lot of how those airplanes are all put together and why and all of that. But yet I put my faith in the airplane and in the pilot. We fear living by faith. Like, what am I actually going to have to do? Where am I going to have to go? What trials is the Lord going to bring into my life? I don't know. Living by faith is kind of scary. And then ultimately, I think, for me, I struggle with saying, not my will, but thine be done. And we just celebrated Easter, so we just spent a lot of time meditating on Christ in the garden. And it takes a whole lot of faith to tell the Lord, okay, not my will. I have so much faith. I have so much confidence in you. I want your will to be done in my life. So tonight, okay, did anybody see my post on Facebook? Okay, yes, we needed suitcases, but I also said something about ladies' Bible study in there. Did anybody have a guess at what tree we're going to talk about tonight? Huh? The fig tree? That's a good guess. Any other guesses? Not the palm tree. All right. So when I say faith, oh, mustard seed. Yes, that's good. But we're not going to go there. Okay, so hold, sorry. Hold the tree thought. I do this all the time in my piano lessons. I'm so sorry. Okay, so hold the tree thought. When I say the word faith, who in the Bible do you think of? Abraham? Okay. Job, Noah, Joshua, Mary. Not one of you said who we're going to talk about tonight. Something new. No, there's nothing new under the sun. Okay. Tonight we're going to look at David. And David probably did not come to your mind when I said we're going to talk about faith. What? David had faith? Well, okay, let's see. He did kill Goliath. Okay, but we're not going to talk about that story. So turn to 1 Samuel 21. 1 Samuel 21. You'll have to hold that thought about the tree for a little while. Okay, goodness, I can't even find 1 Samuel. Come on. There we go. 1 Samuel chapter 21. All right, we're jumping right into the middle of David's life. He's been anointed king. He's killed Goliath. Jonathan and David have that close friendship. Saul has tried to kill him. And in chapter 20, it's the story where Jonathan and Jonathan shoots the arrows. David's on the run for his life. Jonathan shoots the arrows and he tells the lad, okay, go pick up the 3 arrows, and they're close to where David is hiding. So then Jonathan says, if I tell the lad this, then do this. If I tell the lad this, then run for your life. Okay, so this is where we're at. Jonathan shoots the 3 arrows and he tells the lad, those arrows are so far beyond you, go thy way. That was David's cue to escape, run for your life. Saul is still mad and Saul wants to kill you. Okay, so that's what David is dealing with right now. Chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, chapter 21 and 22 kind of cover a whole story, so I've kind of summarized it here. In verses 1 through 3, you have Ahimelech the priest. Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And David and the men that were with him needed some food. And so Ahimelech gives David the showbread, or it's called the hallowed bread, that was reserved only for the priests. There wasn't any other food in the temple. The men were hungry, so Ahimelech the priest gave that food to David. Go down to verse 7, chapter 21, verse 7. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite. Does anybody know who the Edomites were descendants of? Esau. Oh, remember Esau and Jacob? And all their descendants, there's that fight between Esau and Jacob. Okay, so Doeg was a descendant of Esau, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So whose side is Doeg on? Saul's side, not David's. Okay, this can't be good, right? So verses 8 through 15, then David says, hey, we don't have any weapons either. And Ahimelech says, here's Goliath's sword. And David talks about, how good of a sword that is. David left. He went to Gath. He acted like a crazy man to escape from King Achish. And then in chapter 22, David is at a cave in Adullam, and then he goes to Moab. So David has been running from place to place, trying to stay ahead of Saul. Verse 6, chapter 22, verse 6. When Saul heard that David was discovered and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all of his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants that stood about him, "Hear now, ye Benjamites." Okay, he kind of chews them out for not telling him. He says that all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son, Jonathan, hath made a league with the son of Jesse, David. And there is none of you that is sorry for me, like nobody's on my side, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant, my son Jonathan hath stirred up my servant David against me to lie in wait as at this day. Verse 9, then answered Doeg the Edomite. So what does Doeg do? He says, hey, I know where David is. He's in the land of, he was at Nob with Ahimelech the priest. So Saul takes all of his servants and his army and goes to Nob to pay a visit to Ahimelech. Verse 12, and Saul said, hear now, thou son of Ahitub. And he answered, here I am, my lord. Okay, that was Ahimelech responding to Saul. And Saul said unto him, why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, and that thou hast given him a bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as at this day? Saul says, why did you give David food? Why did you give him weapons? That's in conspiracy against me, who was the king. Saul was still king at that time. David was not he was anointed, but he was not the present day king. Verse 14, then Ahimelech answered the king and said, and who is so, what's the next word? Faithful. David had the character quality of faithfulness. That might not be the first thing we think of, but here Ahimelech says, hey, that servant, your faithful servant, who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth out at thy bidding, and is honorable in thy house. Skip down to verse 18. Okay, so what happens? Saul, all his servants, his army, they're here at Nob with Ahimelech. Verse 18, and the king said to Doeg, turn now and fall upon the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell on the priest, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. 75 persons. How many is that? 85. Doeg killed 85 priests that day. Now, turn to Psalm chapter 52. Psalm 52. So for Psalm 52, we just went through the setting of everything that has happened. Well, not everything, but what just happened in David's life when he wrote Psalm 52. If you look, does anybody have the little italics before the chapter starts? Okay. It says, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said unto him, David is come to the house of Ahimelech. So this is the psalm that David wrote during this time in response to what happened. Verse 1, why boastest thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? Number 1, you can write this down in your blank. I'm sorry, I give you blanks because I don't like for you to see exactly what direction I'm going. I'm just weird like that, okay? So I like to keep you guessing, okay? Number 1, Doeg is a mighty man of mischief. Doeg is a mighty man of mischief. So this, why boasteth thou thyself in mischief, it kind of indicates a smug self-sufficiency. Okay, and think about, what is he boasting in? Something heroic? No, something wicked, something vile. He killed 85 priests that were unarmed, priests that were not trained for war. They were not warriors. And if you read through 1 Samuel 22 there, Saul and his servants and Saul's army are standing around. Okay, where's the glory in that? You know, Doeg was a mighty man, but he was not a mighty man in God's eyes. He was nothing compared to God's never-ending goodness. Look at the second part of that verse. It says, "The goodness of God endureth continually." Now, this is not to say, okay, continue boasting in your mischief because God's goodness just is never ending. It's actually a contrast. When you think of the wicked boasting in their acts, okay, compared to God, they're nothing. They're absolutely nothing. Compared to God's never-ending goodness, it's nothing. God's goodness will prevail over man's evil. The wicked boast in their mischief, but their mischief is only temporary. The righteous man can boast in God's never-ending goodness. Letter A, in chapter 52, Psalms 52, 2 through 4, we see his tongue. His tongue. Thy tongue deviseth mischiefs, like a sharp razor working deceitfully. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather to speak righteousness, Selah. Thou lovest all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue. He had a heart that loved evil. Remember last week we spoke about righteous, holy in heart? He was far from that. Letter B, verses 5 through 6. His destruction. His destruction. We see his tongue, okay, they speak with an evil intent. They're manipulative, critical, a heart that loves evil. Letter B, his destruction. Verse 5. God shall likewise destroy thee forever. He shall take thee away and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place and root thee out of the land of the living, Selah. The righteous also shall see and fear, that's fearing God, and shall laugh at him. What the wicked do to the righteous, God will one day do to the wicked. The wicked will, it looks like now sometimes, evil is prevailing. There will come a day when God will right all of the wrongs. And then letter C, his vain faith. His vain faith. So we have Doeg, a mighty man of mischief, his tongue, his destruction, and his vain faith. Look at verse 7. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in his wickedness. Psalms 37, verse 35 and 36, it talks about how the wicked are like a green bay tree. This is not our tree for tonight. But a green bay tree looks like it's flourishing, but it doesn't bear any fruit. And so for us, that's a good visual, a good illustration. It can seem like the wicked are flourishing and that, they are prospering, but they're not bearing any fruit. And even when we were reading through those verses in 2 Peter 1, verses 3 through 8, when you get to verse 8, it said, why do we need all these spiritual vitamins in our life? So that we're not barren or unfruitful. That's why we need faith, so that we can produce fruit. God doesn't want us to be like the green bay tree that just looks nice. On the outside it looks nice, but there's no fruit. So Doeg was a mighty man of mischief, his tongue, his destruction, and his vain faith. He trusted in himself and in his riches. Now, let's pause. Okay, this is not in between verses 7 and 8, but let's just think about where David is at right now. Okay, on the run for his life. 85 people have just been murdered because he was there. How would you feel? What thoughts would be going through your mind? Oh, I just love the Lord. Praise him. He's so good to me. I wouldn't be thinking that. No. So number 2, David, a disheartening circumstance. A disheartening circumstance. I heard this at a ladies' conference. What if God did tell you the answer to your why, God? You know, a lot of times we throw those questions at God. What if he really did tell you the answer? You know, well, number 1, maybe our human brains couldn't handle it because we're finite, we're not infinite. Would you still obey? Would you still surrender? That's where faith comes in, because we don't know. Think of Elizabeth Elliot. You know, there's lots of stuff that goes on Facebook with all of her quotes. And here, you know, they leave everything they have, go to an Indian tribe to share the gospel with them. Her husband and the 4 other men are murdered. What's she supposed to do now? Well, now we know what happened. You know, at that time, she didn't know. And at this time, right now, David does not know what the Lord's going to do. He has no idea. Proverbs 24:10. If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. I can think of my times in my life. I'm like, oh yes, I've got lots of faith. My faith is strong. I know God can do it. And then a tiny little trial comes. I'm like, my strength is small. And you can't argue with it. It's like a statement of fact. If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. There are no perfect Christians, just ones who survive the quitting times. And that's what's really hard, is when our faith, like when we actually have to live by faith, like you actually have to exercise it and continue in that trial or circumstance or whatever, not knowing what God is going to do, not knowing when the end is coming. We want sensible faith, right? Faith that makes sense. We can kind of reason, but then is it really faith? No, because we walk by faith, not by sight. So if I can see it and kind of figure it out in my brain, I'm not exercising faith. There's verses in Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. We all know Job's story. Job 23:10. He knoweth the way that I take, and when he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. My feelings are not God. God is God. My feelings do not define truth. God's word defines truth. And in times like this, I mean, I know for me, I know where I live, my feelings, I go to my feelings right away, and well, this is how I feel, so it must be true. You know, I don't feel like God is with me. I don't feel that he loves me, because if he did love me, why in the world would he let 85 people be killed? That's where our brains go. But notice what David says in verse 8. Here's our tree for tonight. Verse 8. David says, but I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. Okay, so he's comparing himself to Doeg. Why boastest thou thyself in thy mischief, O mighty man? I'm a green olive tree. Wait, what? Like, okay, so I'm getting a mighty man, boasting, I'm picturing somebody like Goliath, all the Sunday school cards. I'm picturing somebody like Goliath. And then David says, I'm like a green olive tree. Okay, like, do those two things even compare? One's a person, one's a tree. What in the world, okay? So number 3, David, he had an enduring faith. David had an enduring faith. And I meant to bring my laptop up here so you could see a picture of an olive tree. You can go online and look them up. If they are taken care of, they have to have the right climate, and they have to have a hot season, they have to have a cold season, they have to be pruned. Every branch has to be able to get sun. I can't think of the word. Or visible. Every branch has to be visible to get sun. Then in order for it to produce the fruit, it has to be taken care of very, very, very specifically. And the longer it grows, these olive trees grow to be centuries old. I mean, like 500, 600, 700 years old, and they can even still, maybe there's trees in what was the Garden of Gethsemane now that are maybe even 1,000 years old, a couple thousand years old back to the time of Christ. They're very, very old trees, and if you prune them, okay, if you cut off part of a branch, there's a possibility, there's a chance that 5 new branches could go from that one little branch. So it's a tree that really, really spreads far out and wide. David says he's like this green olive tree in the house of God. So, an olive tree, what exactly, why would I want to be like an olive tree? Letter A, the stability of faith. The stability of faith. If you know that God is going to take care of you, it doesn't matter what happens, because you have full confidence that God is going to take care of you. Notice it's possible, Warren Wiersbe said, it's possible that when David was at Nob, that there were olive trees there around that tabernacle, that temple. So then as he's writing this, he's picturing those olive trees there. And he's saying, here's a very wicked person, and God is going to bring justice to him. But I'm going to be like an olive tree, one of those olive trees planted by the temple. And it's not so much about where the olive, or what the olive tree looked like, as much as where it was. That olive tree was planted in the house of the Lord. The stability of faith. I have to be in God's presence. I have to be planted in his house. Psalm 16:11, at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. Psalms 18:2, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my strength, my buckler, my salvation, my high tower. Psalms 26:8, David says, Lord, I have loved the habitation of thy house. Psalms 46:1, God is our refuge and strength. Psalm 73:28, it is good for me to draw near to God. Psalms 84:4, blessed are they that dwell in thy house. David wanted to be in God's presence, and that's what kept him stable during his life. Now, yes, there were times he still went up and down. David was not perfect. We all know that. Read through the Psalms. Lord, why are you far away from me? Why are you not, I feel like I'm praying and my prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. There's certainly times when David was not full of faith, but here is a time David was full of faith. And why? Because he said, I'm like a green olive tree in the house of God. He longed for the presence of God. Number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. Not number 2. It would be letter B. But before we get to letter B, sometimes, teaching a lesson on faith, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. And then I'm like, huh? Like, okay, faith. I can't see it, and I have to do something without seeing it. I'm so confused, okay? So, and then right when I was leaving the house today, like the Lord brought it to my mind, and I don't know what, if it was when we went through the book of Ruth, when we went through the book of Esther, but I remember asking Johnny that question of, okay, how do I really live by faith? How do I really do that? What do I have to do in order to show that I'm living by faith? Okay, and I remember he asked me, he said, somebody that does not live by faith, what do they do? Or what do they not do? They don't go to church. They don't read their Bibles. They don't pray. They don't fellowship with other Christian believers. So that's what a person of no faith does. So contrast that, a person that has faith would read their Bible. They would continue to be in church, just like David longed to be in the presence of the Lord. And this was really interesting too. He said, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. He was finding his safety in the presence of God. Okay, but he says here, in the house of God. Think, what just happened in the house of God? 85 people were killed. Okay, so we obviously know he was not talking about physical safety in the house of God, but he knew he could safely place his faith in God, and he longed to be in God's presence. Doeg's faith was in his riches, in himself, in his wickedness, and all of that was the Lord was going to uproot. Okay, letter B. Letter B. The next phrase, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. Well, that kind of sounds like that will help keep you stable. That will help encourage your faith, trusting in God's mercy forever and ever. Letter B, a surety of God's love and mercy. It's constant. It's unchanging. It will continue throughout eternity. That word mercy right there, and the mercy of God forever and ever, it's the same word as the goodness of God endureth continually in verse 1. It's the same word as the goodness of God. And then I think I put these in your handout. Esther 2:17. If you look up that verse, it mentions favor. That's the same word as mercy in verse 8. Ruth 3:10, it mentions the word kindness. That's the same word as mercy in verse 8. Psalms 25:6 speaks of God's loving kindnesses. Same word as mercy. And Psalms 119:76, it says merciful kindness. That's all the same word. So David was trusting in God's love and in God's mercy. I think he wasn't at an emotional high right now, was he? He wasn't bringing back the tabernacle. He wasn't celebrating a military victory. No, he was at an emotional low. But yet he still said, I want to be in God's presence, and I'm going to trust in the mercy of God. Letter C, goodness. I have them all mixed up here in my notes. Letter C is the sovereignty of praise. The sovereignty of praise. Think of what it means, what sovereign means, okay? God is, we know he's ruling over all. It's a trustful expectation, okay? So look at verse 9. This is when you think of the story of everything that just happened, and then David says in verse 9, I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. Had God avenged those 85 priests yet? No, he hadn't. But he had full faith, he had full confidence that one day God would avenge those 85 priests. He had full confidence that one day the wicked would perish. They would not be, they're not going to continue living and be flourishing like the righteous. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. A lot of times when we are in those trials, we're tempted to complain, ask God why. But here David says, no, I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. He had full faith, full confidence that God would accomplish what he was going to do. And then lastly, letter D. Letter D is stillness in waiting. Stillness in waiting. So number 1, we had Doeg, a mighty man of mischief. Number 2, we had David, a disheartening circumstance. Number 3, we had David, an enduring faith. Letter A, the stability of faith. Letter B, the surety of God's love and mercy. Letter C, the sovereignty of praise, praising God for what he's going to do. And then letter D is stillness in waiting. He's praising God for what he's going to do, and then he says, and I will wait on thy name. He was going to wait on the Lord. He could have maybe taken those the men that were with him and gone after Saul to take matters into his own hands. But what did he say? He said, "No, I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints." Psalms 27:13-14. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage. He shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Oftentimes we look at waiting as, like a little, when Kaylee or, Ethan ask me for something, I say, "No, you have to wait. You have to wait." "Oh, do I have to wait?" 2 minutes later, "Mom, can I?" And I said, "No, you have to wait. Waiting is, 2 minutes is not waiting. Like wait till tomorrow," right? But spiritually, when it comes to a good thing, that's the way God strengthens my faith. Wait on the Lord, and he shall strengthen thine heart. We know Isaiah 40:31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. As I'm waiting upon God, that's how my strength gets renewed. That's how my faith gets renewed. God always delivers on his promise on his timetable, not on mine. God delivers on his timetable. Now, the olive tree, you think of when I looked at this chapter, it was faith. I was like, oh, olive tree. Okay, why? Right here I have my olive oil, and in order for the olive oil or an olive tree to get to this point, the olive tree has to be beaten with rods. It has to be shaken. The fruit has to drop. Then those olives have to be pressed, trodden down, trampled down. They would take a great big stone, and then from that they would take all of that and put it in a basket for the oil then to drain out. So all of that beating, pressing, pruning, trampling, you think of this circumstance in David's life, and then other difficult times that David went through. You think of the difficult circumstances in your life that you've gone through, that you're going through. What all of that pressing, all of that beating, all of that shaking, God's using that to strengthen your faith. 1 Peter 1:7 says that the trial of your faith is much more precious than gold. God will test your faith, not to test whether he should accept you or not, but he will test your faith to grow you and to mature you. And so through this olive tree, everything that olive tree goes through in order to get to that olive oil, that's what the Lord does to our faith. Why? So that he can make our faith in him stronger. All right, let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for your word, for the comfort that we can gain from it. Lord, the story of David is a horrific story of what happened in his life, and this was even just at the beginning of his life. But Lord, you used this time in his life to strengthen his faith as he looked to you, Lord, as he dwelt on your character and on your goodness, on your attributes. Lord, thank you for your mercy in each one of our lives. Thank you that you are so good to us. I know so often I don't see your good in circumstances around me. But Lord, that doesn't mean that you're not being good. Sometimes the things that you do withhold are for our good because you have something better, or you know now is not the right time for us. Lord, I pray that you would strengthen our faith, that you would just help us to do the next thing, that the thing that you have told us to do, Lord, that we would place our faith in you and that we would do that next thing. And then we would take the next step and the next step as you show it to us, Lord. Thank you for each of these ladies tonight. Lord, just their desire to grow their faith, their desire to learn more of you. And I pray that you would take this lesson and that your Holy Spirit would speak to their hearts, Lord, that those that are in a difficult time, Lord, that they would gain strength from your word and from the promises of who you are. We love you, and we ask all this in your name. Amen.